30 minutes before my sister's wedding, she vanished. I still remember the way the crystal chandeliers shimmered above the ballroom as if nothing was wrong. Guests laughed. Waiters carried silver trays filled with champagne. A string quartet played softly near the stage. Everything looked perfect. Everything was falling apart. My name is Sophia Bennett, and that morning was supposed to belong to my older sister, Emily. She was marrying Alexander Hayes, the billionaire CEO every business magazine seemed obsessed with. The wedding had been featured in newspapers for weeks. The venue overlooked the Hudson River. The flowers alone probably cost more than my annual salary as an elementary school teacher. Yet none of that mattered when Emily disappeared. My phone vibrated for the 5th time in 2 minutes. I answered immediately. "Sophia, where is she?" my mother demanded. Her voice cracked under the pressure. "I do not know. Her room is empty." Cold panic spread through my chest. I hurried through the hotel corridor, weaving past wedding planners and photographers. When I reached the bridal suite, the door stood open. My mother sat on a velvet chair with tears in her eyes. My father stared at a note lying on the dressing table. Emily's wedding dress still hung near the window. Her shoes remained beside the mirror. She was simply gone. "What does the note say?" I asked quietly. My father handed it to me. The message was painfully short. "I am sorry. I cannot do this." For a moment nobody spoke. Outside the suite, the distant sound of music continued as though the world had not shifted beneath our feet. "She left," my mother whispered. "She actually left." My stomach tightened. Emily had always hated being told what to do. She loved freedom more than stability. But abandoning her wedding? Abandoning hundreds of guests? Abandoning a man like Alexander Hayes? None of it made sense. A sudden knock interrupted the silence. One of the wedding coordinators stepped inside. Her face was pale. "The Hayes family knows." The room seemed to freeze. My father closed his eyes. My mother began crying again. Everyone in New York knew the Hayes family. Powerful, wealthy, influential. People did not embarrass them publicly, especially not on a day like this. "What happens now?" I asked. The coordinator hesitated. "Mr. Hayes has requested a private meeting." "With who?" my father asked. She looked directly at me. "With Sophia." Every nerve in my body tightened. "Why me?" "He specifically asked for you." The answer made no sense. I had never met Alexander Hayes. Not once. My sister had carefully kept her relationship separate from the family until the engagement. I was simply the younger sister, the ordinary one. Yet somehow the most powerful man in the building wanted to see me. 10 minutes later, I stood outside a private penthouse suite at the top of the hotel. Rain tapped softly against the floor-to-ceiling windows beyond the hallway. 2 security guards opened the door. My heartbeat thundered inside my ears. Alexander Hayes stood alone near the glass overlooking Manhattan. Tall, composed, dressed in a black tuxedo. The city stretched behind him beneath gray skies. He slowly turned toward me. His expression revealed nothing. Then something strange happened. He did not look angry. He did not look disappointed. He simply stared at me, for several long seconds, as though he had been expecting me all along. And that was when he said something that changed my life forever. "Sophia Bennett," he said calmly, "will you marry me instead?" Silence filled the penthouse suite so completely that I could hear the rain sliding down the glass behind him. For several seconds, I honestly wondered if I had misunderstood what Alexander Hayes had just said. My mind searched for another explanation. A joke, a misunderstanding, a strange attempt at damage control. Anything except the impossible question hanging between us. "What?" I finally managed to whisper. Alexander remained calm, almost unnaturally calm. His gray-blue eyes never left mine. "Will you marry me instead?" he repeated. My heart slammed against my ribs. "You cannot be serious." "I am completely serious." I stared at him. This was the man every financial network called ruthless. The man who negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking. Yet somehow he was standing in front of me, proposing marriage less than 30 minutes after my sister abandoned him. None of it felt real. "You do not even know me," I said. A faint expression crossed his face. It vanished so quickly I could not identify it. That is not entirely true. The answer only confused me more. Before I could ask what he meant, a knock interrupted us. The door opened and an older man entered. His silver hair was perfectly combed. His expensive suit probably cost more than my car. He looked from Alexander to me with obvious concern. "The guests are asking questions," he said. "The press is already speculating." Alexander never looked away from me. "Give us a few more minutes." The older man hesitated before nodding and leaving. The moment the door closed, I crossed my arms. This is crazy. Perhaps my sister just disappeared. I am aware. Your wedding is falling apart. Also true. Frustration bubbled inside me. Then why are you acting like this is a normal conversation? For the first time, something that looked almost like amusement touched the corner of his mouth. Because panic has never solved anything. Outside the windows, dark clouds rolled across the Manhattan skyline. The city seemed distant. Unreal. Like I was watching someone else's life unfold. Even if I said yes, I began. Which I am not saying, my family would never agree to this. Your family is currently terrified. He spoke gently, not cruelly. They are worried about public embarrassment, financial consequences, and your sister's safety. Unfortunately, he was right. I hated that he was right. And your family? I asked. What would they think? His expression hardened slightly. My family cares about outcomes. Another answer that revealed almost nothing. The room fell quiet again. Then Alexander walked toward the window overlooking the river. Sophia. The way he said my name caught my attention immediately. Not because it sounded romantic. Because it sounded familiar. As though he had spoken it before. Look at me, he said softly. I did. Do you trust your sister will come back? The question hit harder than I expected. I thought about Emily. Her restless spirit. Her constant search for something new. Her habit of running from difficult decisions. Deep down I already knew the answer. No, I admitted. Alexander nodded once. Neither do I. A strange sadness flickered across his face. Then it disappeared. I am not asking because your sister left, he said quietly. I am asking because when I saw you walk through that door, I knew this was the right choice. My breath caught. Before I could respond, the penthouse door opened again. The wedding coordinator stood there, visibly nervous. Mr. Hayes, she said. Everyone is waiting. Alexander looked at me one last time. Calm, certain, unshaken. Then he asked the question that changed everything. Sophia, what is your answer? My answer should have been no. Every logical part of my brain screamed that it was a terrible idea. Yet as I stood in that penthouse overlooking Manhattan, staring into Alexander Hayes' steady gray-blue eyes, logic felt strangely far away. The wedding coordinator waited nervously near the door. Somewhere below us, hundreds of guests sat in a ballroom expecting a ceremony that no longer existed. My family was terrified. The press was already circling. And somehow all roads seemed to lead back to me. Yes, I heard myself say. The word left my mouth before I could fully understand it. For the first time since I entered the room, Alexander's expression softened slightly. Not a smile. Not even close. But something shifted. Something relieved. The coordinator nearly dropped the tablet she was holding. You mean yes? She asked. Yes, Alexander answered before I could change my mind. The next 2 hours passed like a dream, moving too fast to follow. Stylists rushed through hotel corridors. Lawyers appeared with documents. Family members whispered in corners. Every few minutes someone asked if I was sure. The truth was that I was not sure about anything. My wedding dress was not even a wedding dress. It had originally been prepared as an emergency backup for the bridal party. Simple. Elegant. Ivory instead of white. Somehow it fit perfectly. As I stood in front of the mirror, my mother adjusted a loose strand of hair behind my ear. Her eyes were still red from crying. You do not have to do this, she whispered. I looked at my reflection. A few hours earlier, I had been a guest at a wedding. Now I was the bride. Maybe I do, I said softly. Deep down I did not fully understand why. But every time I thought about walking away, I remembered the certainty in Alexander's voice. It was not desperation. It was not panic. It was something else. Something I could not explain. The ballroom fell silent when I entered. Hundreds of faces turned toward me instantly. Shock rippled through the crowd. Cameras flashed. Conversations died. At the end of the aisle stood Alexander. Tall. Composed. Unmoving. The soft glow of crystal chandeliers reflected above him. For a brief moment, everything disappeared except the distance between us. Then I began walking. Each step felt unreal, yet strangely calm. Alexander never looked away. Not once. By the time I reached him, my heartbeat had slowed. The ceremony itself passed in fragments. Vows. Rings. Applause. Music. Words I barely remembered hearing. Then suddenly it was over. The guests stood. The cameras flashed again. And I was officially Sophia Hayes. The realization felt impossible. Hours later, after endless photographs and congratulations from strangers, a black luxury car carried us through the city toward his estate outside Manhattan. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The silence between us was not uncomfortable. It was simply unfamiliar. Finally, I looked at him. Why me? I asked. Alexander kept his eyes on the road ahead. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and removed a small leather notebook. It looked old, worn from years of use. Without a word, he handed it to me. Confused, I opened the cover. My breath caught instantly. Written neatly across one of the first pages was a name. My name. Sophia Bennett. And beneath it was a date from nearly 7 years ago. The notebook felt surprisingly heavy in my hands. Rain continued sliding down the car window, while the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white beyond the glass. For several seconds I simply stared at my own name written on the page. Sophia Bennett. Beneath it was a date. From 7 years earlier. Long before Alexander Hayes became a part of my life. Long before my sister's wedding. Long before this impossible day. What is this? I asked quietly. Alexander rested one arm against the door and looked out toward the highway. Keep reading. My pulse quickened. The next lines were written in neat handwriting. Girl from the bookstore. Green eyes. Kind smile. Bought a children's storybook for a crying boy she did not know. I frowned. The memory appeared instantly. A small bookstore in Manhattan. A rainy afternoon. A little boy crying because he could not afford a book he wanted. I had purchased it for him and thought nothing more about it. The moment lasted perhaps 5 minutes. Yet somehow Alexander had written about it. You were there. I asked. He nodded. Across the room. I stared at him. 7 years ago? Yes. None of this made sense. Why would you write down something like that? For the first time, Alexander seemed uncomfortable. Not nervous. Not embarrassed. Simply unsure how to explain himself. Because it stayed with me. The answer settled between us. Quiet. Unexpected. I looked back at the notebook. Several additional entries followed. Different dates. Different years. Each one connected to a brief moment from my life. A charity fundraiser at a public school. A community reading event. A holiday toy drive. Every memory was small. Ordinary. The kind of moments most people would forget by the next day. Yet Alexander had not forgotten any of them. How is this possible? I whispered. You followed me? No. His answer came immediately. Our paths crossed occasionally. More often than you realized. I closed the notebook. My thoughts spun in every direction. The man sitting beside me controlled a global corporation. His face appeared on magazine covers. Thousands of people wanted his attention. Yet somehow he remembered moments I barely remembered myself. The estate appeared beyond a set of iron gates 30 minutes later. The property stretched across rolling hills overlooking the river. Warm lights glowed from enormous windows. The house looked less like a home and more like something from an old movie. Staff members greeted us at the entrance. Everything felt polished, perfect, unreachable. As I stepped inside, marble floors reflected the soft chandelier light above us. My entire Brooklyn apartment could have fit inside the front foyer. A house manager welcomed me and offered a tour, but Alexander interrupted gently. Tomorrow. The woman nodded and disappeared. We found ourselves alone again. Silence settled between us. Finally, I turned toward him. Why did you really say yes today? The question had been following me since the hotel. Alexander studied me for a long moment. His gray-blue eyes looked different now. Less distant. More thoughtful. Because when you walked into that penthouse, he said quietly, I realized life was giving me a second chance. My heart skipped. Before I could ask what he meant, a housekeeper entered carrying several packages that had arrived during the wedding. One envelope slipped from the stack and landed near my feet. I bent down and picked it up automatically. The moment I saw the handwriting on the front, every breath left my body. The envelope was addressed to Alexander Hayes, and the sender's name was Emily Bennett. The envelope seemed to weigh far more than a single sheet of paper should. My fingers tightened around it while the grand foyer faded into silence around me. Emily Bennett. My sister. The woman who had vanished only hours before her wedding. The woman whose absence had changed everything. Her name stared back at me from the corner of the envelope in unmistakable handwriting. For a moment nobody moved. Then Alexander stepped forward and carefully took the letter from my hand. His expression revealed almost nothing, but I noticed the slight tension in his jaw. The housekeeper quietly excused herself, leaving us alone beneath the chandelier. Rain continued tapping against the tall windows. When did this arrive? Alexander asked. A nearby staff member checked a delivery log. About an hour ago, sir. An hour ago. While we were getting married. The realization sent a chill through me. Alexander looked at the envelope for several seconds before opening it. Neither of us spoke. Finally, he unfolded the letter and began reading. His eyes moved steadily across the page. Then something unexpected happened. His expression softened. Not with sadness. Not with anger. Relief. I stared at him. What does it say? Alexander lowered the paper and looked directly at me. She is safe. Air rushed from my lungs. For the first time all day I could breathe. Whatever else Emily had done, at least she was alive. Alexander handed me the letter. My hands trembled as I read. Emily explained that she had never wanted the wedding. She admitted she had spent months pretending everything was fine because she did not know how to disappoint our parents. She apologized repeatedly for the pain she caused. Then I reached the final paragraph. Sophia, I know you will hate me for this, but I think fate had a different plan. I always knew he never looked at me the way he looked at you. My heart nearly stopped. I read the sentence again. Then a third time. Alexander remained silent. What does this mean? I whispered. He looked away toward the rain-covered windows. I am not sure. But something in his voice suggested otherwise. I folded the letter carefully and returned it to the envelope. Questions multiplied inside my head. Had Emily noticed something before I did? Had she known about the notebook? About those strange moments Alexander remembered from years ago? None of it seemed possible. Later that evening after dinner, I found myself unable to sleep. The estate was quiet. Most of the staff had retired for the night. Soft golden lights illuminated the hallways. Eventually I wandered into a private library overlooking the river. Thousands of books filled towering shelves from floor to ceiling. A fire burned quietly in the stone fireplace. On a side table near one of the leather chairs sat a framed photograph. Curiosity pulled me closer. The picture showed a younger Alexander standing beside several people at what appeared to be a charity event. My eyes scanned the image casually. Then I froze. Standing near the edge of the photograph was a young woman smiling toward the camera. Me. 7 years younger. Holding a stack of children's books. My pulse thundered instantly. I picked up the frame and stared. This was not coincidence anymore. This was something far bigger. And when I turned the photograph over, I discovered a handwritten note on the back in Alexander's unmistakable handwriting. The date matched the notebook entry exactly. Beneath it were 6 words that changed everything. Someday I hope we meet. My fingers tightened around the photograph as I stared at the 6 words written on the back. Someday I hope we meet. The fire crackled softly nearby, but I barely heard it. 7 years ago, Alexander Hayes had written those words beneath a picture of me. 7 years ago I had no idea who he was. I carefully placed the frame back on the table and lowered myself into the leather chair beside it. My heart refused to slow down. Every discovery seemed to pull another hidden thread loose. The notebook, the memories, the photograph, the letter from Emily. None of it fit together the way it should have. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps approaching the library. Calm, measured, familiar. Alexander appeared in the doorway. He had removed his suit jacket and loosened his tie. For the first time all day he looked tired. His eyes immediately found the photograph resting on the table. Then they found me. Neither of us spoke. Finally he walked inside and stopped beside the fireplace. "You found it," he said quietly. I nodded. "You wrote this?" His gaze shifted toward the frame. "Yes." The honesty in his answer caught me off guard. No excuses. No attempt to avoid the conversation. Just the truth. I looked down at the photograph again. Why? The question lingered between us. Alexander remained silent for several seconds. Then he sat across from me. The firelight danced across the room, casting soft shadows against the shelves filled with books. "Do you remember that charity event?" he asked. I studied the image. Barely. A faint smile touched his face. "I remember every detail." Something in his voice made me look up. He was not speaking like a billionaire CEO. He was speaking like a man remembering something important. "It was one of the worst years of my life," he continued. "My company was growing faster than I could control. Every day felt like another problem, waiting to happen." His eyes drifted toward the flames. "Then I attended that event because my public relations team insisted." I listened quietly. Most people wanted photographs, attention, connections. He paused. "You spent the entire afternoon helping children choose books." My chest tightened. That was not unusual. It was for me. His answer came immediately. The room grew quiet again. "You looked happy doing something nobody was paying attention to." He gave a small shake of his head. I had forgotten people like that existed. I stared at him. For years I had imagined powerful people living in a completely different world. Yet the man sitting across from me sounded strangely vulnerable. "So you remembered me because of one afternoon?" Alexander smiled slightly. "Not one afternoon." He stood and walked toward a nearby cabinet. Opening a drawer, he removed a small stack of photographs. My breath caught instantly. There were more. Different events. Different years. A school fundraiser. A community book drive. A holiday volunteer program. In every photograph I appeared somewhere in the background. None were posed. None looked planned. "Alexander," I whispered. "I never approached you." His voice softened. "I never wanted to intrude on your life." I looked at the photographs scattered across the table. Years of quiet memories. Years of unnoticed intersections. Suddenly a realization struck me. "You knew my name before Emily introduced you to my family." His eyes met mine. Neither of us moved. Then he answered with the truth I had been searching for since the wedding. "Sophia, I knew your name long before I ever met your sister." Sleep became impossible after that conversation. Long after Alexander left the library, I remained there surrounded by photographs that quietly rewrote everything I thought I knew. Outside, rain drifted across the estate grounds beneath silver moonlight. Inside, my thoughts refused to settle. The man I had married only hours earlier had been carrying pieces of my story for years. Not because of obsession. Not because of coincidence. Because somehow our lives had been crossing paths long before either of us realized where they would lead. The next morning arrived wrapped in pale sunlight and lingering clouds. I woke to the unfamiliar sight of rolling green hills beyond the bedroom windows. For a few seconds I forgot where I was. Then the events of the previous day rushed back all at once. The wedding. Emily's disappearance. The notebook. The photographs. Alexander. By the time I reached the dining room, breakfast was already waiting. Fresh fruit. Coffee. Warm pastries. Everything looked carefully arranged. Yet Alexander's chair sat empty. A housekeeper smiled politely. "Mr. Hayes left early for a board meeting in the city." I nodded, trying not to feel disappointed by the news. The realization surprised me. 24 hours ago, Alexander Hayes had been a stranger. Now I found myself looking for him in every room. The rest of the morning passed quietly. I explored the estate grounds, walked through the gardens, and tried to organize my thoughts. Around noon, my phone rang unexpectedly. The number was unfamiliar. Hello. Silence answered first. Then I heard a voice I recognized instantly. Sophia. My entire body froze. Emily. Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. Where are you? I am safe. Relief and frustration collided inside me. Do you have any idea what happened after you left? Emily sighed softly. That is why I called. I sat on a stone bench overlooking the river. The wind carried the scent of approaching rain. Then explain it to me. For several moments she said nothing. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded calmer than I expected. Sophia, I need you to listen carefully. I never should have agreed to that engagement. You could have told us. I know. Regret filled her words. But that is not the important part. My stomach tightened. Then what is? Another pause followed. Alexander was never in love with me. I closed my eyes. Hearing someone else say it made the truth feel more real. How do you know? Because every time I talked about my family, he asked about you. My breath caught. Emily continued before I could respond. The first time I showed him a family photograph, he stared at you for almost a minute. The river shimmered beneath gray skies. My heartbeat grew louder. Why did you never tell me this? Because I thought I was imagining it. Her voice softened. Until the day I found an old notebook in his office. The notebook. The same one sitting in my room upstairs. Emily. Sophia, he never chose me. A lump formed in my throat. Then why did he propose to you? Her answer came quietly. Almost gently. Because fate had not given him a way to find you yet. Before I could say another word, a black car appeared at the far end of the driveway. Alexander had returned. And standing beside him as he stepped from the vehicle was someone I never expected to see again. For a moment, I could only stare across the driveway. The phone slipped slightly in my hand as the black car came to a stop beneath the circular entrance of the estate. Alexander stepped out first. Then the passenger door opened. My breath caught instantly. Emily. My sister stood beside him wearing a simple cream-colored coat. Her hair moved gently in the wind as she looked toward the house. Toward me. Everything inside me froze. Relief. Anger. Confusion. Too many emotions arrived at once. Sophia. Emily's voice still echoed faintly through the phone. I slowly lowered it. She looked up from across the driveway and saw me. Neither of us moved. Alexander glanced between us, clearly understanding that this moment belonged to the two sisters. I ended the call without another word and began walking toward them. The distance felt much longer than it actually was. Emily's eyes filled with tears before I even reached her. Then she stepped forward. I am sorry. The words came immediately. Raw. Honest. I am so sorry. For a second I wanted to stay angry. I wanted to demand answers for everything she had put our family through. But seeing her standing there, safe and frightened and human, made that impossible. I hugged her. Tight. Neither of us spoke for several moments. The wind rustled through the trees surrounding the estate. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled softly across the clouds. Finally, Emily stepped back and wiped her eyes. Mom and Dad know I am safe, she said. I called them this morning. Relief washed through me. Then why are you here? Her gaze shifted briefly toward Alexander. Because there is something both of you deserve to know. We moved into the library where a fire burned quietly beneath the stone mantel. Rain began falling again outside the tall windows. The familiar room suddenly felt like a place where lives changed. Emily sat across from us and folded her hands together. For the first time since arriving, she looked nervous. A few months before the engagement, she began, I accidentally found something in Alexander's office. Alexander remained silent. He already knew what she was about to say. Emily looked directly at me. It was a photograph. My pulse quickened. Of me. She nodded. At first I thought it was strange. Then I found more. The notebook. The charity photographs. The memories. Everything connected. I asked him about them. Emily smiled sadly. He did not even realize how much he talked about you. I looked toward Alexander. He stared quietly into the fire. Why did you never tell me? I asked Emily. Because I thought I was protecting everyone. Her voice trembled slightly. I convinced myself that I could make the engagement work. I thought feelings would change. I thought I could ignore what I knew. The room fell silent. Then she looked toward Alexander. But the closer the wedding came, the more obvious the truth became. My heart beat faster. What truth? Emily smiled through tears. That he was waiting for someone he had already met years ago. I looked at Alexander again. This time he met my eyes. No walls. No distance.
No kerfelevoidens.
Just honesty. Then Emily reached into her purse and removed a folded piece of paper. There is one more thing. She handed it directly to me. Confused, I opened it. The paper contained a guest list from the wedding planning files. One name had been highlighted in yellow months before the ceremony. Not Emily Bennett. Mine. The highlighted name seemed to glow against the paper. Sophia Bennett. My name. Not Emily's. Mine. I stared at the guest list while the fire crackled softly in the background. Rain traced silver lines across the library windows. For several long seconds nobody spoke. Then I slowly looked up. Why would my name be highlighted? Emily smiled sadly. Because I found that list 3 months ago. My heartbeat quickened. And she glanced toward Alexander before answering. And when I asked him about it, he could not explain it. Alexander leaned back slightly in his chair. I explained exactly what I knew. Emily nodded, which was not much. Then she turned back to me. At least not at the time. I looked down at the paper again. 3 months before the wedding, Alexander had already marked my name among hundreds of guests. Long before Emily disappeared. Long before I ever imagined meeting him. The realization felt overwhelming. I do not understand, I whispered. Alexander finally stood and crossed the room. The firelight reflected softly across his face. For once there was no distance between us. No guarded expression. No carefully controlled answers. Only honesty. Because I was hoping you would attend. His voice was calm. Simple. True. I stared at him. Why? A faint smile appeared. The kind of smile I had never seen from him before. Because after 7 years, I wanted to know if the person I remembered was real. Emotion tightened inside my chest. Every photograph. Every notebook entry. Every chance encounter. Suddenly none of it felt random anymore. You could have introduced yourself. He laughed softly. To a woman who did not know I existed. I found myself smiling despite everything. That would have been awkward. Extremely. Even Emily laughed at that. The tension in the room finally began to dissolve. For the first time since the wedding, everything felt lighter. Simpler. Emily stood and walked toward me. I owe you both an apology. Her eyes filled with emotion again. Running away was selfish. I shook my head. You were scared. I still should have handled it differently. She looked at Alexander. And you deserved better. Alexander gave a small nod. Perhaps we all did. The 3 of us stood in comfortable silence. Then Emily hugged me one final time. An hour later, she left the estate to begin rebuilding her own life.
No dramaticudie. No bitterness.
Just honesty and a chance to start over. By sunset, the rain had finally stopped. The clouds drifted apart, revealing streaks of gold across the horizon. I found myself standing on the terrace overlooking the river. The world felt strangely peaceful. Footsteps approached behind me. I already knew who it was. Alexander stopped beside me. Together we watched the fading sunlight dance across the water. Do you regret it? I asked quietly. He turned toward me. Regret what? Everything. The wedding. The chaos. The unexpected path that brought us here. Alexander was silent for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket and removed the small notebook that had started everything. He opened to the very first page. The page with my name. Beneath it he had written something new. The ink still looked fresh. Curious, I read the sentence. Some stories take years to begin. My eyes lifted to meet his. And now? I asked. Alexander closed the notebook and smiled. Not the guarded smile of a CEO. Not the careful smile of a man protecting himself. A real one. Warm. Certain. Now, he said softly, I finally get to live the story. As the last sunlight settled over the river, I realized something extraordinary. My sister had not destroyed a wedding. She had accidentally revealed a future. The man I thought was a stranger had been quietly carrying pieces of my story for years. And somehow, against every expectation, the wrong bride had never existed. There had only ever been the right woman waiting to arrive at the right moment.